Priya. Hi, I'm Lauren.
And I'm Ashley.
And I'm Mallory.
And today we're going to be talking to you about international trade.
Yes. So, international trade, the branch of economics concerned with exchanging goods and services with foreign countries, purchases, sales, exchange of goods and services across national borders. Almost every kind of product can be found on international markets such as food, clothing, oil, spare parts, wines, stock, currency. Hurry. The growth in world trade. About 15% of world's output in trade in international markets is in a typical year. While the importance of international sectors varies enormously from country to country, the volume of international trade has increased substantially. Year 1974, the creation of GATT, the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, as an attempt to reduce such barriers to trade in quotes. Subsidies, tariffs, and taxes. In 1997, GATT was replaced with the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization is today's only international organization dealing with rules, trades between nations. Main goal is to help produce goods and services. Exporters and importers how they conduct their businesses, what they do, implementations of monetary trade, dispute settlements, building trade capacity, investments, and trade policy reviews. Development and trade. The invention of money has made trade simpler. Today, traders generally negotiate through mediums of exchange like money, which makes buying and selling and earning very easy. GATT was designed by the UN in 1947.
I don't even know if it's still.
No, it's still recording. Yeah, it's still recording. Later, World Trade Organization established in 1994, dealing with ruling of trades between nations. As transportation has become more increasingly less expensive and telecommunications have improved, hence international trade has flourished.
Okay. I am going to talk about free trade agreements. What is free trade? Free trade is often abbreviated as FTAs, but what is it? Free trade agreements are trade agreements that are often put in place in order to make trade between two countries easier by lifting trade restrictions and eliminating barriers and borders so goods and services can move more freely between countries who have signed this agreement. Common examples that are trade restrictions that are often implied through different countries are tariffs, quotas, embargoes, and licensing requirements. One common example of a free trade agreement that the U.S. is involved with is the North American Free Trade Agreement, also known as NAFTA. The NAFTA was signed in 1993 by Canada, Mexico, the United States, and created one of the world's largest free trade zones. A second example of a common free trade agreement is the European Union, often referred to as the EU. The EU is composed of 28 countries, which allows it to be more competitive in the global market. It eliminates all borders controls, which allow free movement of goods, services, capital, and people. The EU is the world's largest economy and biggest exporter and importer. The common currency used by the EU is the euro. There's 28 countries in the EU, so we're not going to discuss all of them, but these are some of the more popular and larger countries in the EU. We have Spain, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Germany, and Hungary. And another example of a free trade agreement is the CAFTA-DR, and that is the Central American Free Trade Agreement, which also contains the Dominican Republic. The CAFTA was implemented by El Salvador first in 2006 and was finally signed by Costa Rica in 2009, forming the CAFTA as it is today. Sorry, there. Okay, sorry about that. The common goods traded by the CAFTA are petroleum products, machinery, textile fabrics, cotton, cereals such as wheat, rice, and corn, plastics, paper products, medical instruments, and coffee. And here's a map of the countries that are in the CAFTA. Like I said, it's Central America and the Dominican Republic and the United States. The last example I'm going to discuss today is the Association of Southeast Asian Nation Free Trade Agreements. This is the Asia area, but it largely removed all exports and imports duties on items traded between the nations, which also helped dramatically reduce the cost of trade for a huge number of businesses and people. Here is a map of the different countries in the AFTA. We have Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, the Philippines. That's just a few of the main ones.
Yes, and I am going to be discussing the free trade agreements in a couple of the countries. So today we are going to be looking at two countries in particular. We're going to be looking at China, and we are going to be looking at France. So France is a part of the EU, like Ashley just described, which was established in 1993, and it promotes harmony with free trade and just making things easier on the economy and the people when it comes to trading goods between countries. France is also a member of the WTO, which is the World Trade Association, like she said, and the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Currently, through the EU, France has agreements with 32 different countries and has 19 pending negotiations. One of the most controversial negotiations is over the TIPP, which is the Transatlantic Trade Investment Partnership. That is a mouthful. But just like it's complicated to say, it's been a complicated trade agreement to come to. This is between the European Union and the U.S. The goal of the partnership is to promote trade and multilateral economic growth. Currently, barriers between the EU and the U.S. are relatively low because of long-standing relationships with the WTO and a recent agreement such as the EU-U.S. Open Skies Agreement and work by the Economic Council. So currently, free trade is not established in France like it is in other countries, but they're moving towards that. There it is. So next we're going to talk about China. China is way ahead of France when it comes to things with free trade. They're partnered with a bunch of different countries. They plan to add more countries, and they are just going for it when it comes to free trade. A few of the countries they're partnered with are Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Panama. The trade agreement in Australia that was recently agreed upon was very controversial to a lot of Australians, but they made an agreement with China anyway. Even though not everybody was happy with it, they recognized that it was the right thing to do. Asia's role in trade is likely to increase greatly and push a bunch of other countries that have been on the border of should we go to free trade or not. They are likely to have a strong influence on that. According to the Global Enabling Trade Report, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations is now more open to free trade than both the UN and the US combined. So in comparison to France, China is way more ahead of the curve when it comes to free trade, and it looks like it will probably stay like that for many years to come.
Now I'm going to talk to you about how France and China interact in business deals. First, we'll take a look at France. Formality is essential, and France are extremely proud of their language. They have a passion for good food and wine. Businesses that are open to culture and have style are likely to succeed. Even though everyone in France business speaks English, they get offended when you refuse to learn their language. Should you know some basic French phrases and apologize for your lack of fluency early on, they will appreciate it. You should be more formal with senior people and more casual with lower or equal rank. You should start by shaking hands, and you don't want to shake very slow. You want to do it kind of quickly. At the start of the meeting, it should be formal, the professional you. After you are told to use the to form, then you can be more informal. French people introduce themselves surname first. Your business attire is a huge symbol for your professional status. Be conservative, wear natural makeup, and men should avoid showy watches or neck chains. You should avoid signs of impatient or being too friendly. The French like to work through things on their own time. When exchanging business cards presented, make sure you present yours first and then take your French colleagues. Do not put it directly in your pocket. Watch your body language. No chewing gum, use direct eye contact, and no snapping fingers. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about China. You should always remember that good working relationships are vital in China and long-term relationships are valued. You should show interest in China history and their culture. Never criticize a Chinese colleague. Always refer to your Chinese colleague by their titles. Chinese enter the meeting in hierarchical order. Do not interrupt or ask too many questions in the meeting. Business cards should be in French on one side and Chinese on the other, and then you should give the Chinese colleague, when you give them your Chinese business card, present it on the Chinese side. Be aware of your body language because it may portray a different message than intended. Avoid political comments, and formal attire for business meetings is always recommended.